Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. The departure that almost wasn't. The terminal buzzed with the energy of the early morning crowd. The clatter of luggage wheels echoed through the air as travelers navigated their way to distant destinations. Among them was Ava Robinson, a woman of unshakable confidence and elegance. She strode purposefully through the airport, her sharp navy suit a testament to her refined taste. Ava's head was held high, her posture exuding grace as her leather handbag swung lightly at her side. This trip was supposed to be routine, a business conference in Aspen, where she would deliver the keynote speech. But fate had other plans. Ava approached Gate 12, where Flight 739 to Aspen was preparing for boarding. She handed her ticket to the gate agent, a young man who looked up at her with a momentary flicker of uncertainty. His gaze darted sideways to the figure of Captain Matthew Blake standing a few feet away. Captain Blake, tall with a clean-cut jawline and the rigid bearing of authority, observed Ava with a gaze that was cold and calculating. "First class?" the gate agent asked, his voice tinged with hesitation. "Yes," Ava responded, her voice firm yet polite. Years of encountering subtle prejudice had taught her to meet such moments with unwavering composure. She felt the familiar tension creep into the air, the kind of tension that followed her all too often. Ava glanced briefly at Captain Blake, whose narrowed eyes betrayed an unmistakable disdain. The gate agent scanned Ava's boarding pass, then faltered, shifting uncomfortably on his feet. "One moment, ma'am," he murmured, stepping away from the counter to confer with the captain. Ava watched them with a calm exterior, though her mind churned. She had seen this kind of interaction before. She caught snippets of their hushed conversation, the words protocol, passenger list, and special circumstances standing out like red flags. Her heart sank, but she refused to let it show. After a brief exchange, the gate agent returned. "I'm sorry, Ms. Robinson," he said, avoiding eye contact. "There seems to be an issue. Could you wait here for a moment?" "What kind of issue?" Ava asked, her tone steady, but her gaze piercing. The agent fumbled for words, his cheeks reddening. I'm not sure. Captain Blake will speak with you shortly." Behind her, other passengers began to murmur, their curiosity piqued by the delay. Ava stepped aside, folding her arms as she waited. Within moments, Captain Blake approached, his posture stiff and his expression unreadable. "Ms. Robinson," he began, his voice firm and clipped. "I'm Captain Blake. There's been a misunderstanding regarding your boarding. Unfortunately, I cannot permit you to fly with us today." The words hit her like a slap. Ava blinked, momentarily stunned by the audacity of his statement. "Excuse me," she said, her voice icy with restrained anger. "What exactly is the issue?" Captain Blake hesitated for a fraction of a second before speaking. "It's a matter of safety and comfort for the other passengers. We've decided it's best if you take another flight." The euphemisms didn't fool her. Ava knew exactly what this was. Her mind raced, recalling every instance where she had faced similar veiled discrimination. But this was a first, a direct attempt to bar her from a service she had paid for, under the guise of safety. "I see," Ava said, her voice calm, despite the storm brewing inside her. "I would like an official explanation in writing. And I'd like to speak with a representative of the airline." Captain Blake's lips thinned into a hard line. "That won't be necessary. I'm the authority here, and I've made my decision." Ava straightened, her gaze unwavering. "You may be the authority on this aircraft, Captain, but you are not above the law. I'll remind you that refusing service without cause is a violation of federal regulations." The captain bristled, clearly unused to being challenged. "This is not up for debate, Ms. Robinson. Please step aside." By now, the scene had drawn the attention of nearby passengers. Murmurs of confusion and concern rippled through the crowd. Some recorded the interaction on their phones, their cameras capturing Ava's poised defiance and the captain's stern demeanor. "I'm not stepping aside until I've spoken to a higher authority," Ava said firmly. This isn't just about me. It's about accountability. Captain Blake opened his mouth to retort, but before he could speak, a deep voice cut through the tension. What seems to be the problem here? The crowd parted as a tall man in a tailored gray suit approached. His commanding presence and calm yet piercing gaze silenced the murmurs around them. David Robinson, Ava's husband, had arrived. His entrance was as timely as it was impactful. David's eyes met Ava's, silently asking if she was all right. She gave him a slight nod, her expression softening for a brief moment before returning to its steely resolve. Turning to Captain Blake, David extended a hand. David Robinson, he introduced himself. I'm Ava's husband. I'd like to understand why my wife is being denied the flight she's paid for. Captain Blake hesitated, clearly uncomfortable under David's piercing gaze. This isn't a matter for discussion, he said stiffly. I've already explained. Actually, it is a matter for discussion, David interrupted smoothly but firmly. My wife is an accomplished professional with every right to be on this flight. Unless you can provide a valid reason for your actions, I suggest you reconsider. The captain's jaw tightened. I don't have to justify my decisions to you. David's calm demeanor didn't waver. That's where you're wrong, Captain. You're not just dealing with an individual passenger. You're dealing with someone who knows her rights and has the resources to ensure they're upheld. David's words carried a quiet power that silenced even the boldest whispers in the crowd. Captain Blake faltered, glancing nervously at the growing audience. Are you implying, the captain began, but David cut him off. I'm not implying anything, David said. I'm stating a fact. My wife deserves an apology, and I suggest you think very carefully about your next move. The tension was palpable, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Ava stood tall beside her husband, her dignity unshaken. This wasn't the end of the confrontation, it was just the beginning of a story that would ripple far beyond the confines of the airport terminal. As Captain Blake retreated, muttering something about corporate protocol, Ava and David exchanged a glance. The battle wasn't over, but they were ready. Together, they would ensure justice was served, no matter what it took. The power of unity. The tension in the air lingered long after Captain Blake disappeared into the restricted area near the gate. Ava and David stood at the center of a growing crowd of curious onlookers, their dignified composure contrasting sharply with the chaotic energy around them. Ava's mind raced, a mix of frustration and determination fueling her resolve. She glanced at David, who was already dialing a number on his phone with practiced ease. David Robinson was not a man to be underestimated. As a high-profile civil rights attorney, he had faced down some of the most challenging cases of his career with the same calm confidence he exuded now. While Ava had always been her own fiercest advocate, she was grateful for her husband's unwavering support in moments like this. Who are you calling? She asked softly, her voice steady, despite the storm raging within her. David gave her a reassuring look. Our friend at the press office. This isn't just about us, Ava. It's about making sure no one else has to go through this. Ava nodded, her trust in him absolute. She turned her attention back to the murmuring crowd, meeting the eyes of those who had stopped to watch the unfolding drama. She recognized a mix of curiosity, sympathy, and, in some cases, quiet disapproval. Ava wasn't new to this, she had spent her life navigating spaces where her presence was questioned, and she had long since learned how to command attention with grace. One passenger, a middle-aged woman with a kind face, stepped forward. Excuse me, she said hesitantly. I couldn't help but overhear. Are you okay? What that pilot did, it doesn't seem right. Ava offered her a polite smile. Thank you for your concern. I'm fine, but what happened here isn't just about me. It's about standing up against behavior that has no place in our society. The woman nodded, her expression resolute. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know. Before Ava could respond, David hung up his phone and turned to her. They're sending a journalist to cover this, he said quietly. In the meantime, let's get the airline's corporate office involved. Ava's eyes lit up with approval. Good. Let's make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug. David approached the gate agent, who still looked visibly flustered. I'd like to speak with your supervisor, he said calmly. His tone was firm but not aggressive, a masterful balance that left no room for argument. The gate agent hesitated before nodding. Of course, sir. I'll call them now. As they waited for the supervisor to arrive, Ava took the opportunity to engage with the passengers around her. Many had been recording the confrontation, their phones capturing every moment. Ava addressed them with the poise of someone used to commanding an audience. I know some of you may be wondering what just happened, she began. To be clear, I was denied boarding without any legitimate explanation. This isn't the first time I've encountered discrimination, but I hope it will be one of the last. We all deserve to be treated with respect, regardless of who we are or where we come from. Her words resonated with the crowd, and a few people voiced their support. That's outrageous, one man said. They can't get away with this. I saw the whole thing, another chimed in. If you need a witness, I'll vouch for you. Ava thanked them graciously, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and determination. She knew that moments like these were rare opportunities to create real change, and she intended to make the most of it. Minutes later, the airline's supervisor arrived, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense demeanor. She approached Ava and David, her expression neutral but professional. I'm Karen Mitchell, the regional supervisor for this airline, she said. I understand there's been a situation? David stepped forward, introducing himself and Ava. He explained the events succinctly, emphasizing the lack of justification for Captain Blake's actions. Karen listened intently, her expression growing increasingly troubled as the story unfolded. This is deeply concerning, she said when David finished. I assure you, this is not reflective of our airline's values. I will personally investigate this matter. Ava raised an eyebrow. I appreciate your willingness to look into it, but with all due respect, an internal investigation isn't enough. This isn't just about me. It's about ensuring that no one else experiences this kind of treatment. Karen hesitated, clearly aware of the growing crowd and the phones pointed in their direction. What would you like us to do to address this? She asked cautiously. For starters, David interjected, we expect a formal apology from both the airline and Captain Blake. Second, we want assurances that the airline will implement mandatory diversity and sensitivity training for all employees, including senior staff. And Ava added, her voice firm, I expect to be on the next available flight to Aspen, first class, as I paid for. Karen nodded slowly. I understand. Let me see what I can do. As Karen stepped away to make a series of phone calls, the crowd continued to grow. Some passengers expressed their frustration at the delay, while others voiced their support for Ava. The journalist David had contacted arrived soon after, a sharp-eyed young woman with a notebook and a camera. She introduced herself as Clara Hernandez and wasted no time asking Ava and David for their account of the events. This kind of story needs to be told, Clara said as she scribbled notes. People need to see what happens when discrimination goes unchecked. Ava nodded. I agree. And it's not just about this one incident. It's about addressing the systemic issues that allow this kind of behavior to persist. Clara smiled. I couldn't have said it better myself. Karen returned a short while later, looking flustered but determined. Ms. Robinson, Mr. Robinson, she began, I've spoken with our corporate office. We're issuing a public statement condemning Captain Blake's actions and promising a full review of our policies. Additionally, we've arranged for you to board the next flight to Aspen, and we're upgrading your ticket as a gesture of goodwill. David folded his arms. And Captain Blake? He's been temporarily suspended pending the outcome of the investigation, Karen replied. Ava exchanged a glance with David, who gave her a subtle nod. Thank you, she said. But remember, this is just the beginning. We'll be following up to ensure your promises are kept. Karen nodded. Understood. And again, I apologize for what you've experienced today. As Ava and David prepared to board the next flight, they were met with applause from some of the onlookers. Ava turned to address them one last time. "Thank you for standing with us," she said. "Change doesn't happen overnight, but together, we can make it happen." With that, she and David boarded the plane, their heads held high. The battle wasn't over, but they had taken the first step towards something greater, a fight for justice, equality, and the power of unity. The ripple effect. The hum of the plane's engines filled the cabin as Ava and David settled into their new seats, upgraded to the airline's premium first-class suite. The physical comfort of the luxurious leather seats and attentive service did little to ease the tension that still lingered in Ava's chest. She sipped her water thoughtfully, her mind racing with the implications of what had happened that morning. She was no stranger to adversity, but the blatant discrimination she'd experienced at the hands of Captain Blake had struck a nerve she couldn't ignore. David, seated beside her, leaned in. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle, but probing. "I'm fine," Ava replied, though her tone betrayed the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. "I just keep thinking, how many others have gone through this? How many times has someone like Captain Blake gotten away with it because they didn't have someone to back them up?" David nodded, his expression serious. "That's why we have to follow through. This can't just be about today, it has to lead to something bigger." As if on cue, David's phone buzzed on the tray table in front of him. He picked it up and frowned. "It's Clara," he said, referring to the journalist who had documented their story earlier. He swiped to answer the call, putting it on speaker. "David, Ava," Clara's voice came through, tinged with excitement. "I've just published the article. It's already gaining traction, hundreds of shares in the first hour. People are outraged by what happened to you, and the airline's name is trending on social media." Ava exchanged a look with David, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. "That's good to hear," she said. "What kind of reactions are you seeing?" "Mostly supportive," Clara replied. "People are calling for boycotts, demanding accountability, and sharing their own stories of discrimination. It's like your experience has opened a floodgate. But there's also some pushback, defenders of the airline and Captain Blake claiming it's being blown out of proportion." Ava sighed. "Of course there's pushback. There always is. But if we stay focused, we can turn this into a real conversation about change." "Exactly," Clara agreed. "I'll keep you updated as the story develops. And Ava, if you're willing, I'd love to arrange a follow-up interview." "Let's see how this unfolds," Ava said thoughtfully. "I want to make sure we're not just reacting, we need a plan." "Understood," Clara said. "Keep in touch." As the call ended, Ava leaned back in her seat, staring out the window at the clouds rolling by. Her mind was already spinning with ideas. She and David had always used their platforms to advocate for justice, but this moment felt different. It felt bigger. Backlash and support. By the time Ava and David landed in Aspen, the story had exploded. News outlets picked up Clara's article, adding their own commentary and analysis. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like #JusticeForAva and #EndAirlineDiscrimination. Influencers, celebrities, and activists weighed in, amplifying the story to millions of followers. Yet, alongside the wave of support, there was an undercurrent of hostility. Detractors accused Ava of playing the race card or seeking attention. Some even defended Captain Blake, claiming he must have had a legitimate reason for his actions. David was quick to reassure Ava when he noticed her scrolling through the comments on her phone. "Don't let the negativity get to you," he said. "For every troll out there are 10 people who stand with you." "I know," Ava said, setting her phone aside. "But it's exhausting. This fight, it's never ending." David took her hand. "That's why we're doing this together." A call to action. The following day, Ava stood at the podium of the Aspen conference, addressing a packed audience. The room was filled with professionals from various industries, but today's keynote speech had taken on a life of its own. What had originally been planned as a talk about innovation in business had transformed into a rallying cry for justice and accountability. Ava began her speech with a deep breath, her gaze steady as she scanned the room. Yesterday, I was denied the right to board a flight I had paid for, not because of a safety issue, not because of a mistake, but because of the color of my skin. The captain made a decision that he thought he could justify, but in truth, it was rooted in bias. The room was silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. This isn't just about me, Ava continued. It's about the countless people who face discrimination every day, people who don't always have the platform or resources to fight back. It's about creating a society where dignity and respect are the norm, not the exception. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. I'm calling on all of you, business leaders, innovators, changemakers, to take a stand. Examine the biases in your own organizations. Implement policies that ensure equity and inclusion. And when you see injustice, don't look the other way. The audience erupted into applause, a standing ovation that left Ava momentarily breathless. She wasn't just speaking to the room, she was speaking to a movement that was rapidly gaining momentum. Corporate accountability. Meanwhile, the airline scrambled to address the growing PR crisis. Their social media accounts were flooded with demands for action, and boycotts were already impacting ticket sales. The CEO released a statement condemning Captain Blake's behavior and promising sweeping reforms, including mandatory sensitivity training and an independent audit of the airline's policies. Behind the scenes, David worked tirelessly with his legal team to ensure the airline's promises weren't just empty gestures. He filed a formal complaint with the Department of Transportation and initiated talks with civil rights organizations to push for industry-wide reforms. Ava and David also received an invitation to meet with the airline's leadership. The meeting was tense but productive, with the airline agreeing to several of their demands, including a public apology from Captain Blake himself. A movement ignited. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effect of Ava's experience continued to grow. Her story inspired others to come forward with their own accounts of discrimination, creating a groundswell of demand for change. Advocacy groups rallied around her, organizing campaigns to hold airlines accountable and push for systemic reforms. Ava and David found themselves at the forefront of this movement, using their platforms to amplify voices and drive meaningful action. They launched a foundation dedicated to promoting equity and inclusion in the travel industry, with a focus on education, policy change, and support for victims of discrimination. As they stood together at the Foundation's inaugural event, Ava reflected on how far they had come. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. She looked at David, her partner in every sense of the word, and smiled. "This is just the beginning," she said softly. David squeezed her hand. "And together, we'll keep going." The fight for reform. The Foundation's inaugural event was a resounding success, but Ava and David knew the true work lay ahead. They had committed themselves to a larger fight, one that demanded persistence, resilience, and the willingness to face resistance at every turn. The Foundation's mission. The Equity in Flight Foundation quickly became a beacon for those who had experienced discrimination in the travel industry. It was built around three core pillars: advocacy, education, and systemic reform. Advocacy. The foundation provided legal and emotional support to individuals facing discriminatory practices. Ava and David hired a team of experienced attorneys, social workers, and public relations experts to help victims navigate their cases while amplifying their voices. Education. They partnered with universities and training institutions to create diversity and inclusion programs tailored to the travel and hospitality industries. These programs were designed to address unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and the value of inclusive practices. Systemic reform. The foundation launched a campaign called Fly Fair, pushing for federal legislation to ensure airlines adhered to strict anti-discrimination policies. They worked closely with lawmakers, presenting compelling evidence from countless stories like Ava's to highlight the urgency of reform. Resistance and pushback. Despite the foundation's growing influence, the journey was anything but smooth. Ava and David faced resistance from multiple fronts: industry executives, public skeptics, and even some politicians who viewed their efforts as unnecessary or disruptive. One of their biggest challenges came during a hearing before the Senate Subcommittee on Transportation. Ava and David had been invited to testify as part of their push for the Passenger Protection and Equity Act, a bill that aimed to enforce stricter regulations on airlines regarding discriminatory practices. The hearing was contentious. Industry representatives argued that the proposed reforms were too costly and unnecessary, insisting that existing policies were sufficient. Some senators echoed these sentiments, questioning whether Ava's experience was truly indicative of systemic issues. Ava, however, was undeterred. "Senators," she began, her voice steady but impassioned, "I stand before you not just for myself, but for the countless individuals who have faced discrimination while traveling, people who were told they didn't belong, who were humiliated, and who felt powerless to fight back. This isn't about isolated incidents, it's about a pattern of behavior that persists because we allow it to." She continued, her words carrying the weight of personal experience and collective struggle. "This bill isn't about punishing airlines, it's about holding them accountable. It's about ensuring that every passenger, regardless of their race, gender, or background, is treated with dignity and respect." The room was silent as Ava finished, her gaze unwavering. Even the most skeptical senators seemed momentarily disarmed by her conviction. Building momentum. As the hearing concluded, Ava and David found themselves surrounded by supporters. Activists, lawmakers, and even a few airline employees approached them, expressing their gratitude and pledging their support. One of the most surprising moments came when a young flight attendant approached Ava, her eyes brimming with tears. "Ms. Robinson," she said, her voice trembling, "I work for the airline where that captain was employed. I've seen things, heard things, that made me uncomfortable, but I didn't feel like I could speak up. Your courage has given me hope. Thank you." Ava placed a hand on the woman's shoulder, her heart swelling with emotion. "You have a voice," she said gently. "And together, we'll make sure it's heard." This interaction reaffirmed Ava's resolve. She and David redoubled their efforts, meeting with stakeholders, hosting town halls, and leveraging media coverage to keep the pressure on. A game-changing partnership. In a pivotal moment for the movement, the foundation secured a partnership with a major airline that publicly endorsed the Passenger Protection and Equity Act. The airline's CEO, a progressive leader who had been quietly following Ava and David's work, reached out to propose a groundbreaking initiative, a pilot program that would integrate the foundation's diversity training and anti-discrimination policies into their operations. "This isn't just about doing what's right," the CEO said during a press conference announcing the partnership. "It's about recognizing that inclusivity and equity are good for business. When passengers feel respected and valued, everyone wins." The pilot program included mandatory training for all employees, from gate agents to senior executives. It also implemented a new reporting system to address complaints of discrimination swiftly and transparently. The airline's commitment sent shockwaves through the industry, prompting other companies to consider similar measures. The personal toll. While their work brought meaningful progress, it also came at a personal cost. Ava and David found themselves constantly in the spotlight, their every move scrutinized by both supporters and critics. The pressure was immense, and the weight of their responsibility often felt overwhelming. Late one night, as they worked side by side in their home office, Ava set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. "David," she said softly, "do you ever wonder if we've taken on too much?" David looked up from his laptop, his expression thoughtful. "I think about it all the time," he admitted. "But then I remember why we're doing this. It's not just for us, it's for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. And for everyone who never got the chance to fight back." Ava nodded, her resolve returning. "You're right. We can't stop now." A victory and a vision. Months of relentless advocacy finally paid off when the Passenger Protection and Equity Act was passed with bipartisan support. The legislation mandated comprehensive anti-discrimination policies across the airline industry, with strict penalties for violations. It also established an independent oversight body to monitor compliance and investigate complaints. The victory was celebrated as a turning point, but Ava and David knew it was just the beginning. The foundation expanded its mission, working to address discrimination in other areas of the travel and hospitality industries. They also launched scholarships and mentorship programs to empower underrepresented individuals pursuing careers in these fields. At a gala celebrating the foundation's achievements, Ava took the stage to address the audience. Her voice was filled with emotion as she reflected on their journey. "This fight has never been just about me," she said. "It's about creating a world where everyone has the chance to move freely, to chase their dreams, and to be treated with the respect they deserve. We've come a long way, but there's still work to be done. And I promise you, we won't stop until the skies, and the world, are truly equal for all." The room erupted into applause, a standing ovation that symbolized not just the impact of Ava and David's work, but the hope they had inspired in so many others. The legacy of change. The applause from the gala echoed in Ava's heart long after the event ended. It was a powerful reminder of the impact she and David had made, yet it also served as a solemn call to continue. The fight for equity and justice was far from over. But this time, they weren't fighting alone. The movement they had ignited had grown into a collective force, carried forward by countless voices, determined to reshape the future. Generational impact. A year after the passage of the Passenger Protection and Equity Act, the changes were beginning to take root. Airports and airlines across the country implemented mandatory sensitivity training programs, revamped complaint reporting systems, and introduced zero-tolerance policies for discriminatory behavior. Reports of incidents began to decline, and passengers of diverse backgrounds shared stories of feeling safer and more respected while traveling. Ava and David's foundation expanded internationally, partnering with global organizations to address discrimination in travel worldwide. They hosted summits in cities like London, Johannesburg, and Tokyo, bringing together industry leaders, activists, and policymakers to share best practices and craft solutions tailored to regional challenges. One particularly moving moment came during a conference in Atlanta, where a young black girl approached Ava with a notebook clutched to her chest. The girl's mother explained that her daughter had been following Ava's story and now aspired to become a pilot. "Ms. Robinson," the girl said shyly, "I want to fly planes one day, and I want to make sure everyone feels welcome when they're on my flights." Ava knelt down, her eyes glistening with tears. "You're going to be an amazing pilot," she said warmly. "And I'll do everything I can to make sure the world is ready for you." The encounter reaffirmed Ava's belief that true change wasn't just about policy, it was about inspiring the next generation to dream bigger and demand better. Confronting new challenges. While progress was evident, the movement faced its share of challenges. Some airlines resisted the changes, citing increased costs and logistical hurdles. Pockets of backlash emerged, fueled by individuals who clung to outdated beliefs or felt threatened by the shifting landscape. One particularly egregious incident occurred when a pilot at a competing airline refused to undergo mandatory diversity training, claiming it infringed on his personal freedoms. The pilot's refusal sparked a heated debate in the media, with some commentators framing it as an issue of individual rights versus corporate responsibility. Ava was invited to debate the issue on a popular news program. Facing a well-known conservative pundit, she remained calm and composed as the pundit argued that the training was unnecessary and divisive. "Respect and inclusivity are not burdens," Ava said firmly. "They're the foundation of a society where everyone can thrive. This training isn't about shaming anyone, it's about equipping people with the tools to understand and respect one another. That's not divisive, it's unifying." Her words resonated with viewers, and the segment went viral, further solidifying Ava's role as a thought leader and advocate for change. Personal triumphs. Despite the intensity of their work, Ava and David made it a point to prioritize their personal lives. They found solace in each other's company, whether it was hiking the trails near their home or sharing quiet evenings with close friends. Their partnership was a source of strength, and their love for one another only deepened as they navigated the challenges together. One of their most joyful moments came when they celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. Surrounded by friends, family, and colleagues, they reflected on how far they had come, not just as a couple, but as individuals dedicated to a greater purpose. "You've always been my rock," Ava said during her toast to David. "And together, we've built something that I hope will stand the test of time." David smiled, his eyes shining with pride. "And you've always been my inspiration. Everything we've done because of your courage and vision." The Monument of Justice. 2 years later, the foundation unveiled its most ambitious project yet, the Monument of Justice, a sprawling educational and cultural center located in Washington, D.C. The monument was designed to honor the history of civil rights and travel, while celebrating the progress that had been made. The centerpiece was a striking sculpture of a pair of wings, symbolizing freedom and equality. Around the monument, interactive exhibits told the stories of individuals who had fought against discrimination in the travel industry, including a special section dedicated to Ava and David's journey. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Ava stood before a crowd of thousands, her heart swelling with gratitude and pride. "This monument isn't just about the past," she said. "It's about the future we're building together, a future where everyone can move freely, without fear or prejudice. This is our legacy, and it belongs to all of us." A new chapter. As the years went by, Ava and David gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the foundation, entrusting its leadership to a new generation of passionate advocates. They continued to serve as advisors, lending their wisdom and experience to the cause they had dedicated their lives to. In their quieter moments, they reflected on the incredible journey they had undertaken together. They had turned an act of discrimination into a movement that changed the world, proving that even the darkest moments could spark the brightest flames. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Ava turned to David with a smile. "We've done a lot, haven't we?" she said softly. David took her hand, his eyes filled with love. "We have. And it's only the beginning for the world we've helped shape." Ava leaned her head against his shoulder, content in the knowledge that their legacy would live on, carried forward by the countless lives they had touched and the movement they had built together.